So I hope everybody had a chance to look at the papers. So that's a summary of Ois, Dalet, and Hey. Ois Vav begins a series of shaylas, probing deeper, and now trying to understand the yichud of Havai and Elikim. Yichud of Havai and Elikim. Till now we spoke about Hisavos Mishem Havaya, Hisavos Mishem Elikim, and the contrasting differences. Now the point is the yichud, because that's what makes the Mokim HaMikdash Ma'neira HaMokim Hazeh is that Shem Elikim, notwithstanding its presence and active role, Davish is not creating through Shem Havai directly, but rather with this duality of Shem Havai and Shem Elikim. Nonetheless, Shem Elikim is not master, doesn't conceal. What do these words mean? This is all to explain this. First, in Arichus, it's really a foundational maamer, very foundational maamer, and more than foundational, it's the fact that Rebbe's Shiddushim here, in these foundational inyonim, I should say, of his creation, Roshad creation. It's a maamer to learn many times, every maamer is. So, again, till now we explained Havai and Elikim as they were independently, and now begins the Yichud. Now, it's important to note, he makes this point in our order later a little bit, I'll mention it now, that the answer often brought in Chassidus, that Mokim Ma'oren Eina Min Amida, that there is space and not space at the same time. This is Mekoich Atzmos. There's no discussion. There's no discussion. It's Mekoich Atzmos, that there can be a Yichud of Havai and Elikim, of Bli Gvul and Gvul. Nimna Nimnoim, Hashem is withheld from the withheld. The withheld is Atzilus and Nimnoid and Sof, and he's Nimna Mina Nimnoim. In English, beyond. So the Eibishter can do anything, there's no shaylas, and he can have the fusion of infinite and finite simultaneously, even though they are rationally mitzad the system and the Godol of creation fundamentally impossible. So the whole point of this maamer is we're not explaining, drawing on Atzmos to explain it. This is a hasbara, he says in Seichel. So this is, the Rebbe is explaining here Hashem's invitation to understand creation and his desire that we understand creation at the most sublime level. Not simply at the end of the day when confronting the impossibility of Gvul and Bli Gvul being one, Mokim Moren Eina Min Amida, Yichud Havai Elikim. No, so Havayu Hu Elikim, Hu Atzmos, the Eibishter can do anything, and therefore these things are possible. These things. Not these things. It's one thing. It's one fundamental impossibility. The maamer, however, is explaining this again. Apiseicha mitzad, not mitzad ha'atzmos, but mitzad the system itself already that Hashem has put into place. Mitzad the giluy Shem Havaya. We drew that distinction earlier. That mo'er is not atzmos. Because mo'er has to emanate. In fact, that's what mo'er means, a luminary that produces light. And we're speaking in these dargas. We're speaking in the darga of Havaya and Elikim, which are already manifestations, not atzmos. And to explain, much more difficult now. That's the whole point of this maamer, how there can be a yichud of Havaya and Elikim, even mitzad Havai and Elikim, not drawing on the Eibishter can do anything, so therefore the opposites fuse, which is the standard answer. Not here. That's what we're laboring to understand, and this is a tremendous invitation, intimacy, that Hashem's desire for us to understand creation at its most sublime levels of his expression. And the diak is to understand it, so that there's an appreciation in a relationship. That is the whole point of it. So Oizvav now begins a couple of questions as we probe deeper now, addressing the Yiheye of Havayalikim. I'm not going to read it inside again, we'll just give a summary of what we're up to. So it begins to explain in Oizvav that the boundaries of the world and time and space and so on, that's Shem Elikim. And if, having said what we did till now, this is the understanding, it changes and deepens. It just gets much more nuanced. So till now, in the explanation we gave till now, the sheet that we gave, the conclusion is that Shem Havaya creates, the world would not be mugdar in the Gedorim of Mokim Osman. Be bekiru. He said, Migdash, he said, Ochem yesh Havaya b'Mokim Hazeh. That's why. Because in Beis HaMikdash was the revelation of higher than the time and space, which is bound with time. Time is the distance between 2 points on some level. Because there's revealed Shem Havai. However, Shem Havai is revealed there in Shem Elikim. Because the Kodesh HaKadoshim was finite with all of its measurements. As remember, the Aron was finite, 2.5 by 1.5. And still, because that's the Yichud of Havai. The question on that was the end of Moishe. We don't need Shem Elikim. Why can this not be achieved through the Gil of Shem Havai alone? There's no need for the Shem Elikim for the Tzimtzum. Why? Because we said earlier in a whole Arichas Habir that Shem Havai also creates something which is Be'ein V'erech, and that was the chsoron of the moshel of what? Fill in the blank, please, somebody. That's where we needed to Misholim, the chsoron of what? I'll repeat it again. Shem Havaya can create also something, a dover chod, or something totally foreign, as it were, and novel. So which moshel was the chsoron for that? And that was answered by Oyer and Moyer, because Oyer is Aiva Efes. Oyer is nothing but the Moyer. The problem with Oyer and Moyer is not a Bria, it's Pashtus. So therefore the question is the explanations that he gave before are all to lead us to an appreciation of the questions, which will then lead us to a, God willing, an understanding. So the question now therefore is that we don't need Shem. In order to create the place, the time, the place, which is completely bottled and higher than what? Shem Havaya. Shem Havaya creates also a dove chod, something novel. And we said earlier that there's an important point, that the bittul engendered by Shem Havaya when it creates what Tziva v'nivro is in the bittul of the nivroim to Shem Havaya. Not in the revelation of Shem Havaya in them. They don't express infinite. They're bottled to the infinite. They remain finite. They feel that the whole Metzias is only the Eibishter that creates them b'chol rag at every moment, and hence utterly bottled. And that's what Shem Havaya engenders. Well, that's Beis HaMikdash. That's Kodesh HaKadoshim, a place of complete bittul. So the conclusion is that even as creation comes with Shem Havaya, there should be Zman or Mokim, but Zman or Mokim completely bottled. Why do you have to have Shem Elikim? That's the shaila of the first paragraph of Oizvav. Questions clear? Bit of a heads up on those listening at home, locally. You're answering like the bittul of Hashem Havaya. Yeah. Not just margish the Indian. Okay. Kind of if you say so, or more like I kind of get. Okay, that's also good. You have to hold on the question of Chassidus. A question in Torah altogether. It's also part of Torah. Not only because it leads to a deeper answer, the question itself, you have to understand. Okay, so that's the Shaila. Summarize the Shaila in simple language. Hutzivov and Ivro Shem Havaya creates creation, something novel fundamentally, and it's totally bottled if there wouldn't be Shem Elikim. So that's it. That explains Mokim Marnein Minamida right there. What's the insistence of Chassidus? That's not so. That there's place and space, space and time. The Beis Hamikdash is from Shem Elikim, not from Shem Havaya directly. So he answers as follows. Okay, we're going to write this out also briefly, so we can just see the flow. It also would help if we learn the Maimar with a pencil and we just underline like the keywords. You look at the Maimar, this word of the paragraph, that's where the Chiddush starts. In capsule. It's the words on the page. See a few. So I'm just telling you right now that I don't know if you have the same format here you do. Shin Chav Daled, all of you have the layout in the sense it's different paragraphs. So it's in the second paragraph of Beis Vav, I'll tell you which words are the Nekudah. And that's that if Havaya already means connection to time. That's the first thing you pause. It's a critical point. Havaya means Hoya Heva V'yiyah. But what? Ke'echad as well. Not differentiated, completely. We can't imagine what this means. I can't, maybe you can. What it means, we did say, the vantage point of all of time is, but that moshel is not a good moshel perfectly, We said that time for the Eibush, that's one of the answers of Chida. It's all now, like stepping back and you see past, present, and future. But even then, when you're looking at this point, you're not looking at this point. You're mapping it out in front of you. It's all here in front of you. But it's here and it's here and it's here. It's not a perfect marshal at all. It's really all in one Nakud. Can't imagine. Past, present, future. Future can be in one Nakud. But we can intellectually appreciate that. And I'm sure that contemporary science, quantum physics, would help in understanding this. And the concept, the evolving understanding of the nature of time and space, for that matter. It's all very out of Mashiach. And reflective of Chassidus. Of Chassidus is saying, therefore, scientists understanding reality in ways it didn't before because of Gilui Chassidus. That's why. It wasn't graspable before. It wasn't in the world. It's a famous story to note. It's very instructive. A story with Beis Yosef. It was a Talmud of the Arizal. Beis Yosef was once, Rabbi Yosef Karo, struggling over something in Gemara. And fasted. It's a long story. He fasted for a week or longer. That heaven should open his eyes and understand. And finally, after a whole series of fasting and so on, he understood. The question was resolved. A short while later, in Beis Medrash, he says, I guess it's fast. Yeah, it's by that Yizam. And a young fellow, one of the young Talmidim, not part of the good Arya, the young lions, the Arizal's Talmidim, just a Talmud. And he's overhearing him learn the same passage of Gemara the guy's learning. And he's learning a lot he's supposed to learn. Mr. He said, there's a question, this and that, the Kasha of the Beis Yosef. Guy thinks for a few minutes and gives the answer. Beis Yosef was crestfallen. It was here. Something's wrong. He heard of it, fasted, begged heaven to open his eyes, and this young fella, not on his level, not in learning and not in piety, It's obvious, or fairly obvious. So he went to the Arizal looking for a tikkun, but some things obviously terribly amiss. The Arizal said to him, no. He said, because you pasach esaderech, by you discovering it since that you opened up, you trod the path, and now it's available. It's in the world. The idea you broke through every question is a hammer behest at a clipper, and you broke through it, you transformed it. Now it's available without effort, without a lot of effort. And so to all the Inyanim, Chassidus revealed that so on, make fundamental changes in the world and things become possible. Like, another example, is women's rights. It started with the suffragettes, etc. But all of a sudden, thousands of years, the world was women are second class and chattel, and all of a sudden, almost overnight, voting rights. It all starts around Samach Vov and earlier, the Mile of Malchus. Chassidus starts to speak this Mile. It came with the Sefer Gervers. It just becomes pulsates through the world and becomes, yeah, we should do this. All of a sudden, this new idea and all the new ideas. Unfortunately, get corrupted without the guidance of Chassidus. They corrupted, including the new woke culture. The root of it, it's wonderful. Yes, there's no Godol, it's not no Malkim choose. There's a deep truth to that. They're not bound by but not guided by Torah, it becomes self-destructive. Contrary, the deeper the truth, democracy and freedom and so on, because it's so deep and draws on the believable, the Ein Sof, Yiheye, we're not guided by Torah, it becomes terribly corrupt, destructive, ruining lives and bringing misery. But just needs tweaking a little bit of tweaking, a little bit of chassidus. That's all it needs. Oh, that's what we're saying. Beautiful. Okay, let's not lose the flow. So now the answer to the question. So the question is that Shem Havaya, you don't need to filter Shem Elikim, gewaltige Geschichten. You can create the Shem Havaya, Kegdol, will create, it also creates Mokim Zman. And at least in the Beis HaMikdash, there it's bottled, but the question is on the Beis HaMikdash. There, the bitl of Mokim Bar Neiman Amid, why are we saying it's from Shem Elikim? It's pure Shem Havaya. So the answer is the Shem Havaya, there's also time there, but time is there, what ke'echad, and therefore, when Havaya would create, it would not have, the point missing would be, there would be space, and the space would all fuse and coalesce into one because of its bitl to the creative force, but that's not the kavanah. The kavanah, the space remains separate. And hardcore, this shekol amma b'makim acher, each amma is elsewhere. In other words, he's saying, think about this, maybe you can come up with better imagery and language, that if creation would be in Shem Havaya alone, then the six directions of space would be ke'echad as one. Likewise, time. Now, it's important, there's an important caveat here. Still, we have to remember, and this is the chidush, that Shem Havaya will create Metzius. It doesn't become Metzius, but the Metzius will be so bottled would the Metzius be, and that it's not a stira to be one with that which is the opposite of it, because of the bittul. So it's kind of like, maybe emotional would be, and that we're talking aloud, Chassidus brings the king, the two sparring ministers, they were chosen because they have different worldviews and different characters. That's what the king wants. He wants a debate in the Senate. He wants Chesed and Gevurah to come out, and therefore to come out with a fair, a fair conclusion in terms of policy, etc. They cannot agree on any subject, they're not supposed to. They just simply can't. But when the king expresses his view, they both do. King comes in all of a sudden and says his position, then Chesed and Gevurah, the two ministers, agree. And what happened here is they still remained Chesed and Gevurah, but because they're bittul to the king, so they surrendered to the king. That's not what's Mokim Modern Menim Namid. Because at that moment, when they surrendered to the king, he's not chesed and he's not gevura, even though he still is chesed and gevura. But what he's saying is not chesed and gevura because of his bittul. They're echoing and mirroring what the king said, the melech said, because of the bittul to the melech. They're true ministers. Their whole identity is the melech. That's why they're there. They don't presume to have any independent identity. They know that their opinion is only asked for because the king appointed you, complete bittul. So when the king gives his opinion, they're naturally bottled. Problem is, we're not hearing chesed and gevura here. And Mokim Ma'od and Ein Ben Amida is the space. The space is there, we can see it. As we said before, that three people go in to the base, to the Kodesh Kadoshim at the same time and all call out their measurements. It's 20 amas high. It's 2.5 amas in the middle. This guy says 10, he says 10, and he says 2.5 at the same time. All holding on to their identity. It's the words he means here. That should call Ahmed b'makim achad. But in the case that I just described, the two ministers are not, he's saying chesed, he's saying gevura. They're both saying the melech because even though he is chesed, because of his bittul. It's not the kavanah. It's not the rebbe. So Shem Havaya does not, the Ibisha creates alone, the Shem Havaya is not realized is in kavanah of Mokim Ma'od and Ein Ben Amida. Therefore, you have to have the yich.
Generally, why is it just everywhere else is obviously Yishmael and it's shame.
Yeah. That's the point it's going to be. It's coming next. So, now the next, did we start the Yiheye? We did. So now begin the Yiheye. So all is good in the world, we've explained. You have to have what? Havai and Elikim. Why do you have to have Havai and Elikim? Because Shem Havai would create the Metzias, and the Metzias would be Mokim and Zman, but it would all be one. Because of the bittul to Shem Havai, to the Keicha Ein Sof that creates. Like the Melech, fits. Like the Melech who expresses his opinion in the Senate, in the Congress. All is good. However, it's not. We've got to go deeper and then deeper again. Zayin mitzadich lahov, you have to understand. And read slowly here because every letter here changes here. Shemitzad zeh, shemitzad Shem Elikim. This, that mitzad Shem Elikim is chalkas, the Mokim Uzman. You put a comma there, would help if you have a pencil. This, the Mishad Shem Elikim. So Shem Elikim engenders the chalkos, the division of Mokim Uzman, each Am in its own place. That doesn't change. All the fees because Shazman Mokim Kumeshim Mishabim Shem Elikim Mitzios. Because Shem Elikim creates Zman and Mokim in the way of Mitzios. Whereas Shem Havaya now goes to Shem Havaya. Nirgish Bashisha Ktsob is the Mokim, the Mokim. Because when it will be felt in the 6 directions of space, and in the past present of time, if it would be felt that Shem Havaya, then it would be Kulam Ke'echad. It'll be united. That's what's Chesed. Metzias the Shem Elikim, Havai engenders Kulam Ke'echad. So now the question is, how do you have the two together? How do you have the two together now? And again, not, as I said before, Atzmos can do everything. No, the point is to be masbidis. Mitzad Shem Havaya, not mitzad Atzmos. Mitzad the Giluyim Havaya and Elikim. Gewaltige Chiddush of the mind. The Eich Shai should be Mokim Ma'od, Mokim should be Schalkus Shemeidush and Metzias. So you're insisting on the one hand it has to be not a surrender to the Koyach HaMahavos, which would be if the world was created, or it's the Beis Hamikdash. If the Mokim, the Kiddush HaKadoshim was created by Shem Havaya only. But there's got to be a Schalkus hardcore division of each, the opinion. The opinion's got to remain of the different ministers. So you can have different opinions and still be one. What does this mean? So how is it possible that the Mokim should be Schalkas? Which means Metzias, not Shem Havaya alone will be Ke'echad, but Metzias is separate. Here, Gilu Shem Havaya, in this Gvul should be the Gilu Shem Havaya, Einem in Amida. How is that possible? And again, let's look at Ha'orah 59. Come, what's asking a kasha? How can you have Gvul and Blikvul together? It's impossible. Maybe she can do anything. That's the end of the story. So that's what's explaining Kama Mekaymas. The Mokim are the Einem and the Midim, it's not in the noise. The Eibush is hidden from the hidden, beyond. Shenoisa HaFachim, he bears opposites. So there's no question, you can have infinite and finite at the same time. That's not what we're saying here. Abba Mekaymas was saying, basically whatever it was. And Gimel. But in the places Shabbat HaKodesh, it was not saying starting here. This is, but the places we're pointing out, it looks like the Rebbe wrote this. I would strongly guess that the Rebbe wrote this. They submitted this for maybe they even asked a question. The Rebbe wrote this later. At any rate, but if you look up the sources of the footnotes earlier, showing in Bittul Mokim Magabel Mailim Mokim, where there it's talking about the Bittul of space to beyond space. His Gabrus Havai al Adnai, or Alikim is explained in the previous audits in Journal Day 1. We're not talking about Atzmos, we're talking about Giluyim, Havaya, and Adnai Malchus Alikim in general. That's the discussion there, not mitzad the Atzmos, but inside the Yichud, in their own manifestations, these Gabrus of Havaya on Shem Elikim, not again drawing on the Koyach Atzmos. At least there's some measure of grasping Seichel, not just drawing on God can do anything, but some measure of understanding, since we're speaking about what? Not mitzad Nina Minois, but mitzad the Giloy. It's Gabrus of Shem Havai and Shem Elikim. It's possible, which we're now going to explain a little bit. That's the point. Further, important. This is the summation of the Ha'orah here. Because here we're talking about these Gabrus of Shem Havaya over Shem Elikim, and yet Shem Elikim doesn't dissolve. Ninam Nimnois is. They're both complete, but not one is interplaying with the other when we have a third result. But both are the complete in the full force. They can do anything and they want. Like Zachar B'Shomer was said at one time. How can at one time the same word, mouth, say the word Zachar, say the word Shomer? No, impossible. They can do anything. But they was said at once. We're not saying that. That's inside the Atzmos. Both remain as they are. They fuse because of a third higher cause. Not speaking this. He was speaking the Giloy of Shem Havaya here in this place, and therefore it engendered the Mokim Bar Neidim in Amida. Hey, wait. Talking about Giloyim, infinite. That implodes finite. So how does the finite, the Mokim remain hardcore Mokim? Why isn't, as he said before, a complete surrender, dissolvement, like the two ministers just echoing the king? Questions clear? Huh? Yeah, it's not a... Fellas, many of you are hiding behind the anonymous titles. Put a thumbs up, something. Yeah, okay. So the Nekudas Habir tomorrow, something to think about. And this is a very healthy question. So it's a very good question to ponder. Why we dissolved out of existence? What does it mean? We can remain in Metzias and still be connected to hiding Metzias. Metzias and hiding Metzias at the same time. And not mitzad only, Atzmos. Okay, anything can happen. No, mitzad creation. It means even in my world. It means even in my world. Healthy question. Okay.